I think Hagerty is like a really high floor addition. I don't see a lot of bust potential with him because he can score at all three levels. He can play on or off the ball, and he can really pass. And I think that's the underrated part of him that can elevate an offense is he is an unselfish creator.
Hello and welcome to another 3-Maw Pod. No John or DY today as they had conflicts, but I think you'll all be more than satisfied with the replacement on today's show as I'm joined by Isaac Trotter, national college basketball writer at CBS Sports as well as 24/7 Sports. Isaac had a terrific story on CBSSports.com a couple days ago regarding K-State landing All-American PJ Hagerty in the transfer portal, as well as a detailed breakdown of the roster composition and how it might mesh in the 2025-26 season. And we're going to spend a lot of time discussing that with Isaac as well as other topics. But before we do that, I want to remind all of you, as always, to go pick up some of Holiday Distillery's Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon at your local liquor store so you're stocked up for the summer. We were at the lake this weekend, had some on hand, and we'll be at an event this Saturday at a friend's pool, and they always have some of Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon on hand. So make sure you get stocked up. Football will be here before you know it. You'll want to have it at your tailgate. And we continue to hear tons of rave reviews from many of our listeners who continue to tweet us about how much they've enjoyed the Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon. Isaac, thanks so much for jumping on the show with us. And as I mentioned a minute ago, you had a great piece that I really enjoyed and a lot of K-State fans read on the addition of Hagerty to the K-State roster, the work K-State's done in the portal this offseason. But before we start with the current state of affairs, let's go back to last year, right around this time. And people like myself had thought K-State had done a great job in the transfer portal when you looked at it on paper. But when you watched the way the season played out, obviously it didn't work outside of a great 3-week stretch. And you had noted in your article that you'd spoken before last season to a Big 12 head coach who had concerns and pessimism around the roster K-State had assembled. Could you expand on what you think went wrong for the Wildcats in 2024-25 and maybe potential lessons learned from last season and last offseason?
Yeah, I think it was kind of complicated, right? I think a lot of people at the beginning of the year were like, okay, like how many power forwards, how many centers do they have here? I think as I mentioned in the piece, the Big 12 has some of the most aggressive defenses in college basketball. A lot of teams are trying to emulate what Houston does at a high level, what Iowa State does at a high level. And so when you have a small guard and Doug McDaniel is kind of like your trigger man for that against defenses that love to blitz ball screens, that kind of raised some concerns kind of externally. And, again, at the same time, like the team that we saw last year was not the team that I think Jerome Tang and company kind of wanted it to be. Like a Trotter they expected and they paid to be a big time piece of that roster. Like I think they thought that they could bully ball teams a little bit with even moving Coleman Hawkins to the 3, playing a Trotter at the 4, insert your pick of the litter at the 5, and being an awesome defensive rebounding team, an awesome offensive rebounding team, using Coleman Hawkins' playmaking as kind of like that 4-on-3 type of guy when they would blitz those ball screens and would be able to kind of beat you with just bigs, right? Like just kind of dominate you with like their size. And it just didn't coalesce. And, I think part of that was a little bit of unlucky shot volume or shot efficiency, right? Like there was a stretch where Kansas State were shooting like 26% from 3 and their opponents shooting like 39% from 3. And Jerome Tang's teams usually had been one of the best 3-point defenses in a while. Then that flipped for those 3 weeks. And then, of course, it flipped back the opposite way down the stretch. But, yeah, I think it's a situation where Jerome Tang did not have enough guards that he trusted with the ball in their hands. And if this roster's any, indication of how he felt about last year, I think he's out to change it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that and the overall roster composition because it certainly seems like a drastic contrast in terms of now they've gone very guard heavy in the portal and got some bigger guards as well, as you mentioned in your piece. So let's jump into the addition of Hagerty first. Yeah, he was CBS number 2 player in the entire transfer portal this offseason. As you noted in your article, Isaac, just the 3rd All-American ever in college basketball to land at another school via the portal, which is incredible to me. And before we jump into maybe what he brings to the K-State roster, I want to ask you about his recruitment. We know K-State had been talking to Hagerty for quite some time, but they hadn't been publicly linked or connected to him during his time in the portal until a post from Hitman Hoops on social media appeared last week and said K-State was a serious contender for his services. I'm sure you had probably heard K-State was talking to Hagerty behind the scenes, but what did you make of the recruiting process for Hagerty and how everything went down?
It was weird. It was just a weird recruitment deal with him. I think I talked to him at the combine and he was like, "Oh, I haven't talked to a single team." And I'm like, "Okay, like we got to know how this is going, right? Like my representation may have, but I haven't, all of those things." And, I think it made sense for him to be fully focused on the NBA draft. But at the same time, the thought of PJ Hagerty hitting the portal was not something that just popped up in March or April. This was early in the January, February, you started hearing some of those rumbles, and his camp wanted serious money, like $8-9 million was the type of numbers that you're hearing. And you're like, okay, like what are we doing when you hear that type of number that's thrown around? Like, that's obviously not going to come to fruition. And, he hits the portal, he hits free agency. And I think things have started to change a little bit where NC State was like the team that you kind of heard the most buzz about. And the longer it goes in the portal and the longer a team is rumored as the leader, the scarier it gets. So if you don't have a commitment, and then Darian Williams obviously pops there. And I think it was just, I think NC State would have taken one or the other. I don't think they had room in the budget for both. Personally, that's just my opinion. And when Williams popped on board first, I think that changed the calculus for NC State. And Kansas State really swooped in there at the last second and was able to get that done. And to be honest, I could talk myself into the fit Kansas State being a little bit better than NC State, so I can see why Hagerty liked Kansas State and why obviously Kansas State really liked Hagerty as well.
Well, you mentioned the financial numbers floating around, and obviously his father had leaked out the $4 million number, right, when he entered the portal, wanted him to be able to play point guard as well. And, then the reports come out, and it jives with what we've heard, that the number is actually right around $2.5 million that K-State was able to get him for. I mean, when you consider the current landscape, Isaac, of college basketball, especially the portal this offseason, and the numbers skyrocketing to an even higher level than we've seen before when it comes to NIL, just how much of a bargain is PJ Hagerty at $2.5 million for Kansas State?
No, it's huge, because I think you look at Donovan Dent, who went to UCLA. His number is over 3 for one of the top point guards in the portal. Like 2.5 is phenomenal. I think Hagerty actually might be a lesson moving forward of being in the portal last might not be an advantage like it once was. It's not like, hey, last man standing, I can get a bidding war and going to get this money, because a lot of teams with rev share were kind of getting that money out as quick as possible, trying to allocate it as quick as possible and kind of fill those budgets up that way. So yeah, $2.5 billion for an All-American, for a top 5 transfer, top 2 transfer for us at CBS is a pretty darn good deal. And, I think it's fair to say that Hagerty kind of fumbled this situation. I think Memphis had more on the table for him originally when he was first negotiating with that. And so to end with 2.5, not $2.5 million is obviously a great number, right? But for Kansas State moving forward, that works just fine. But I think for Hagerty, he kind of went into this process wanting way more than 2.5, and that's kind of what the number settled as. And again, another example of being in the portal earlier in this cycle was way more valuable and way more lucrative than being in the portal at the last second.
A lot different, obviously, than last year when Coleman Hawkins was one of the last guys in the portal, and K-State ended up spending and making him one of the highest paid players in college basketball. Isaac, we know Hagerty ranked 3rd in the country in scoring this last season, was 15th nationally in scoring the year prior at Tulsa. But for folks who aren't familiar with this game, what are maybe his strengths and what does he bring to this team?
Yeah, it's funny. If you like Zach Lowe, I heard Zach Lowe make a comp about Jimmy Butler, how he's like a finagler of buckets, just randomly getting offensive rebounds and putbacks and randomly gets fouled. And that's how I feel about PJ Hagerty. He just finagles buckets. He'll like offensive rebound off a missed free throw. Somehow PJ Hagerty's right in the mix of it. Somehow there's a transition run out, and somehow PJ Hagerty's right in the middle of it. And he is one of the elite foul drawers in college basketball. That's an absolute skill. And you see that in transition. When he gets it in the open floor, he is wasting 0 time. It's 1-2 dribbles right to the rack, and he flings his body into defenders, initiates contact, and gets to the foul line. That's enormous. Now, as I noted in the piece, and I heard you guys talk about it a little bit earlier, so I'm not the first one to say it, but Kansas State's top 5 guards last year shot 275 free throws. Hagerty shot 274 himself last year. So and that's because that's his game. And so I think he's more than just a free throw merchant, so to speak, but he's gotten a lot better at some of these other aspects. He could really hit pull-ups at a high level. He puts a ton of pressure on the rim, even in half-court situations. If you take out some of those transition run-out layups, stuff like that, over 30% of his shots last year were at the rim. And he really improved as a 3-point shooter, being able to attack pick and rolls. If a defender went under his ball screen, he was comfortable shooting it. It looks a little bit awkward. Like the jumper isn't like the cleanest thing in the world, but it goes in. If he has time to load up on it, it's something that can be a knockdown shot. And he is really a drop coverage killer because he also has a super awesome float game. Like he gets 2 feet in the paint and can make plays. And I think sometimes in the portal, like the last, not this cycle, but the cycle before, it's like, man, it's kind of scary, like to go after some of those like guys who bounced around a few schools and like maybe they score a lot at certain spot, like an AJ Store, so to speak, right? Like, and that might be a little bit scary. I think Hagerty is like a really high floor addition. I don't see a lot of bust potential with him because he can score at all 3 levels. He can play on or off the ball, and he can really pass. And I think that's the underrated part of him that can elevate an offense is he is an unselfish creator. Yes, he's on the floor to score first. I'm not saying he isn't, but like if I'm putting him in a bucket, I would put him in like a scorer creator mold, not like a initiator point guard mold. And that's fine because he just gets guys involved. And I think he has a lot of avenues to help an offense, whether that's free throws, whether that's knocking down mid-range jumpers, whether that's rim pressure, all of those things, whether that's creating for others. That gives them a much higher floor than an AJ Store, where it's like, okay, if the fall away mid-range jumpers aren't going in, what are you bringing to this offense? If you're not, just pounding the ball away in isolation for, 5, 6, 7 dribbles every trip.
Before we kick to a break, as always, want to tell you about our friends over at homefieldapparel.com. You got to go get stocked up with all your home field apparel gear. I've got a home field apparel hat on right now. I got another home field apparel hat sitting right here. If you're watching on YouTube beside me, I've got 4 home field apparel K-State hats with retro sleek designs on them, as well as tons of home field hoodies, Kansas State t-shirts. My closet is stocked full of home field apparel. You can get 15% off your first order with discount code 3MAW24. They've got over 50 K-State items to choose from. Sleek retro gear. They've been around for a while now. They've been a big name in the apparel space, and you don't want to miss out on home field apparel gear. Go get stocked up. Go to homefieldapparel.com. And again, we've got you covered. Discount code 3MAW24. When you go to checkout, you'll get 15% off your first order.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story, like Brain Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Brain Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner impossible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Folks, it's playoff time, and if you're still just watching games, then you're missing out. With Pick 6 from DraftKings, you can turn your hoops knowledge into real cash. Just make your picks, track your score, and if you hit all 6, you're looking at bigger payouts than Prize Picks flex plays. Nobody's dropping better payouts than Pick 6. Hit 6 picks, and that's 25 times your cash. And if you beat your competition, you could be looking at a 500 times bag in your pocket. And right now, new customers can get $50 in bonus picks with just a $5 entry. Here's what you got to do. The playoffs are on, so why not take a shot at making a little money while you're watching? Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app right now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN to play $5 and get $50 in bonus picks. Better payouts, bigger wins, only on Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 bonus picks that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. Terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
Well, you hit on what I was going to ask you, and that was really how he might translate to being a pure point guard for Kansas State. And you just answered that question, so we'll jump ahead on that front. But you did mention the free throw numbers, Isaac, and you had a great nugget in your article, and you also had tweeted it out about K-State's guards finishing dead last in college basketball with just 5.1% of their pick and roll possessions finishing in a trip to the free throw lines, 364th out of 364 teams. We've talked about it too. I mean, K-State ranked 326th in free throw rate nationally last year. We know Hagerty was second nationally each of the last 2 seasons in free throw attempts. But you also bring up Nate Johnson, and I guess maybe this is where we jump a little bit more to the broader roster and who K-State has brought in. CBS Sports had Nate Johnson, the MAC Player of the Year, ranked as the number 56 player in the portal. Abdi Bashir, the Monmouth transfer, number 71 in your guys' portal rankings. How do you kind of just see this overall roster meshing? What do you make of what K-State's done in the portal this offseason?
Yeah, I would say the backcourt just makes a little bit more sense because there's like differentiating strengths. I think for me on paper, Johnson is a sneaky huge ad because I think he's going to be their best perimeter defender. I think he's the guy that you put on, a Darren Peterson, or you put on, a Christian Anderson when you play Texas Tech, or Baylor when Obi Agbe comes into, like, he's that guy that's going to guard him. He's thick. He can really get over screens. He can fight through screens. He's switchable, so you could guard him on the big wings if you need him to. He is another one of those guards that really gets 2 feet in the paint. He really is trying, like, that's his game, and he can really, really put pressure on the basket. And I think that's something that Kansas State guards that do a good enough job at last year. Part of that was, multiple bigs on the floor at times that shoot it from 3 as well as you thought maybe Coleman Hawkins would. So maybe an extra defender was in the paint. But yeah, like, still, both of those 2 guards, Hagerty and Johnson, are those big physical guards that are constantly getting 2 feet in the paint and create advantages. I think that's where Bashir, I was scared about Bashir in the portal. He checks off a lot of boxes of a bust candidate when you talk about a guy who doesn't get to the rim, doesn't defend at a high level, and really relies on those threes going in. Like, that's a scary profile. But I think in this situation, it's a lot more manageable. I think they built a team that can cover up some of his flaws and doesn't necessarily need him to be like, a huge high usage type of player. Because I'm a big fan of Kostic, or however you say his name, Andre Kostic, the freshman. I think he's going to be a big time player for them. And if Bashir's flaws are covered up by Johnson and Hagerty, I think he can be a more useful, helpful role player. If you were kind of asking me like, oh, Abdi Bashir's Kansas State's second best player this year, I think you're probably asking for, something scary to happen there.
Well, and I think that's where the significance of Hagerty comes in too, Isaac, is not only is it a huge addition, but it allows other guys to more slide into their roles that are more reasonable, right? I mean, totally. Nate Johnson was going to be K-State's best player, but I think he's better suited to be K-State's second or third best player, and getting a guy like Hagerty allows you to do that. And you mentioned getting to the rim, the free throw numbers that we talked about. I mean, I will throw in, PJ Hagerty and Nate Johnson combined to go 338 at 416 at the charity stripe last year. You just mentioned it. K-State's 5 lead guards combined for 274 attempts. So, in other words, Johnson and Hagerty combined to attempt 132 more free throws than K-State's 5 lead guards last season, and they made 128 more. And you could add Coleman Hawkins, who played more of the point forward, to those 5 guards. And still, K-State made 255 out of 352 at the line, with him factored in, 6 guys, still 83 less than Hagerty and Johnson. And then getting to the rim, if you add Coleman Hawkins into the mix on top of those 5 lead guards, Isaac, K-State 210 of 408 on shots at the rim, which is 51%. You talk about Hagerty and Johnson taking a far greater percentage of their shots at the rim. K-State, those 6 guys, 408 of their nearly 1,500 shots came at the rim from those 6. In other words, only 27% of their total shots. These are 2 guys that you mentioned are going to get down the court, be heat-seeking. I think the word you use, heat-seeking missile, getting down the court. K-State seems like a team that's going to probably be able to be a good transition team this year as well, right?
Hagerty is like an auto instant raiser for your transition offense. Like, he's almost like a one-man fast break in that regard, where it's just like, I'm going. Like, you guys can come with me or not, but I'm going in transition, and I'm going to try to get to the basket. So, yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of data, too, that would suggest that those transition threes are the most valuable shot in college basketball right now. The median average of college basketball teams shot 35% on transition threes last year. That's pretty good. So I like Bashir in those open court threes. I like the idea of Kostic in those open floor threes. I like Hagerty in those open floor threes. Like, pushing the ball, get the ball up, moving the ball like through the pass, not necessarily with a dribble up the floor, can create some of those really good looks before these defenses get set. Because, I mean, as we both know, getting the half court against some of these Big 12 defenses, good luck and best wishes, because it's one of the best scouted defensive leagues in the country.
A few more questions and we're going to get you out of here, Isaac. I guess, and this is a harder question to answer, and look, we don't know what the final roster is going to look like for K-State. We don't know what it's going to look like for a lot of Big 12 teams or teams across the country. KU still got spots to fill, so do others as well. But if we assume that Tyreek Smith gets his waiver and is on this roster next year, and Elias Rapique, a guy that we've been told is in the fold for Kansas State's roster, another European in addition to Kostic, if they have him too, what do you kind of see as the ceiling for this team, maybe relative to the Big 12 and maybe as well NCAA tournament hopes? And what's maybe the floor, which I imagine is, not making the postseason once again?
Yeah, no, I think that this team is a lot more high floor than last year's team. I just don't know how this team doesn't just be rock solid, like at worst, because Hagerty is just he's such a offensive elevator. Johnson makes a lot of sense there. Maybe one of Bashir Kostic hits at a decent rate and becomes a rock solid third guard you can trust. It makes sense. Now, I'm not really in on Marcus Johnson. He scares me. I think Kansas State would be in their best interest to not have him in their rotation. I just think there's a lot of flaws there defensively that's going to be exacerbated in the Big 12, especially as a rebounder as well, and just his body. So, if you can continue to add to this front court mix, if Tyreek gets healthy, if Kamari McGriff continues to elevate into what the type of player that they think they can be, they're not the biggest team in the front court. So maybe you have some concerns about, hey, how do with the meat and potatoes, how are we rebounding? How are we boxing out? What's that look like? But Tyreek Smith plus wingspan, McGriff plus wingspan to me on tape. I haven't seen a number for him. That kind of reminds me a little bit of that Houston type of build of those 6'8", 6'9" guys with really long wingspans that can kind of mitigate some of the, they're only 6'8", 6'9" type of deal. So I think for me in the Big 12, the top of the Big 12 is so top heavy. Texas Tech is going to be absolutely awesome. I think, BYU, Houston, those type of teams are going to be really good. I would throw Kansas State in that second tier of the Big 12 where it's hey, we have a chance to be a top 5 team in the league if everything breaks right. But I don't see this team missing the tournament. This just doesn't make sense to me if they would miss the tournament. So the floor is, we missed the tournament, things go wrong, Hagerty gets hurt, blah, blah, blah. But this team is not a high risk, high reward type of team, in my opinion. I think it's a really high floor team compared to last year. It's the good of Kansas State was as good as any team in the Big 12, and the bad of Kansas State was the worst team in the Big 12. I think this team's way more solid in that regard, and the peaks and valleys will be mitigated a lot more.
Well, I know K-State fans love hearing that feedback because it's been a rough 2 years missing the NCAA tournament in back-to-back seasons. And I guess that leads to my next question, Isaac, is what's kind of the national perception of how Jerome Tang is viewed or perceived after the Elite Eight in year one? It was so much fun, followed by no NCAA tournament appearances the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, it's been odd. I think some people kind of have wondered if you maybe set the bar a little too high right away in year one when you make the Elite Eight and you're okay, have expectations change where we're going to be a team that, is contending in the Big 12 year after year for the top of the league, and that's just not how it works in college basketball. Now, I think he has a lot of questions to answer of it's been 2 years in a row where the rosters have had he's taken some iffy guys, the Arthur Kaluma edition 2 years ago was well documented of people being what? Same thing type of last year with the Coleman Hawkins and the Chor and Ogano and Yenso overpay, all of those different things. So I think there's questions about more of his roster building techniques and if this is going to work long term more than just Jerome Tang as the coach. Because I think we've seen a lot of examples of him being a pretty rock solid coach compared to the Baylor years, obviously how he elevated that team a couple years ago. And if you can get back to the tournament, you could kind of maybe point to, hey, the last 2 years are kind of a blip on the radar. We've kind of learned how we want to be in transfer portal scouting. We've gotten better at this. We're using our resources a little bit better, and we're going to be in position to be competitive year after year. But I think nationally, a lot of people were oh, Jerome Tang, Kansas State's going to be this unbelievable team a couple years ago, unbelievable program year after year. And the last 2 years have kind of maybe changed the calculus of oh, it's really hard to win in the Big 12 when there's teams like Texas Tech and BYU at the top. We're spending $12, $13, $14, $15 million on their rosters.
2 more and we'll get you out of here. But to that point, he adds Matt Driscoll, North Florida head coach, to his staff to be his associate head coach, a veteran head coach with 16 years at North Florida, a guy known for an offensive mind and also an offensive mind that they take a lot of threes, obviously, in North Florida. Like, what's the significance of getting a proven veteran head coach on this staff, considering, I mean, let's be candid, Jerome Tang still, as far as experience as a head coach, it's just his 4th year in his career as a head coach, and having a guy that's a veteran like that on your staff.
Well, to be honest, I wish it would have happened a little bit earlier because I liked a couple of those guys on that roster as potential transfer targets. Like Josh Harris out of North Florida is a nice-looking freshman. He ends up at Indiana. They also had one other guy that went to Indiana that I really liked to see.
Just Zy Miles.
Just Zy Miles. Yeah, it's like, okay, like could we have maybe sped this process along a little bit earlier and gotten that done? But yeah, you're right. I think it's, again, North Florida, one of the teams that had one of the highest three-point rates in transition. I think if you add a Hagerty, that makes me think that they're going to try to take a lot more transition threes. Not that Kansas State wasn't in the past, because obviously Housley would pull from the parking lot whenever he had a chance last year in transition. But yeah, like I think that would probably be the first, X's and O's wise thing that I look at, and we'll kind of see how it goes from there. I think maybe more big picture wise, it's just like kind of signaling how hard it is to be a mid-major head coach right now. And it's like a little bit easier to go to the high major ranks, throw on your offensive coordinator hat if that's exactly the role he ends up taking. And maybe that signals kind of like the sea change of what mid-major coaches type of prioritize right now.
Well, we certainly see head coaches going on to move on from that mid-major. Linder did it to Texas Tech, left Wyoming, right? A guy who made the NCAA tournament just a few years ago and then left that job. Look, last one, Isaac, you had another great piece on CBS Sports on May 19th titled, quote, "Make way for the Euro invasion, why more international stars are choosing college basketball over the pros." I wanted to ask you about that. Obviously, K-State's got a couple of Europeans coming in, which is new footing for the Wildcats, new territory. Several years ago, you'd see some international players playing high major basketball. I think at Gonzaga under Tommy Lloyd, associate head coach for Mark Pugh, landing guys like Sabonis, Hachimura, Olnick, Ronnie Turiaf, and other international stars. But other than that, I mean, it feels like in the last year or two, particularly this offseason, there's a massive influx of talent coming over to the U.S. from other countries to play basketball. We know NIL's helping lure a lot of these guys over here, but what else is driving college coaches to look international?
I think the portal has gotten really, really pricey. I think some of the numbers you hear going around for a guy that averaged like 14 in game in the Big Sky last year, who's probably, maybe he's a good high major rotation player. And it's like, oh yeah, he wants 1.2 million. So get that done. I think the Euro invasion really is a way to thread the needle a little bit, because guys over there don't make anything. Like, you're talking about really good players who are 21, 22 years old. They're making $70K. And so like the opportunity to make $700K over in playing college basketball, you 10 times their income, they're all about that. And so the NCAA, the red tape of eligibility is going to be, a thing that a lot of people are working towards, but it's a nice way of like, hey, we have a budget here. We can have a proven, veteran guy that's played a lot of good basketball against really good competition in the most part. Like that's one thing that they're playing against, former really good players. Like the stud point guard at Colorado is like one of the, from a couple years ago. Why am I blanking on his name? He was the one who's playing over there right now. Why am I blanking on his name? Never mind. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But like that's the type of talent that they're playing against, is like graduated college players. They can come over here. They can 10 times their income. You're not breaking the bank, so to speak, for all of the international talent. And you have a chance to really, make a good, decent roster. Because I think that's the other thing here that we don't talk enough about in the portal. It's like, we lost 2 classes in this cycle. You lost the COVID seniors, and you lost the regular seniors who didn't get that 5th year. So it's like, it's just different. Like you're just not going to have like this super team era anymore. And so they have to find different ways to add to their roster. And I think the international route is one way to do it. And it certainly helps that, Kasparis Yakushonis comes over to Illinois and boosts his stock. Yegor Demin comes over and has a decent year and boosts his stock, so to speak. So I think like those success stories have made the pitch for college basketball to bring those international guys over way, way easier. And they're coming over in droves. I don't know the final number, what it will be, but it would not surprise me at all if there are like damn near 50, international products at the high major ranks alone. And that's only like 78 teams.
Yeah. At the time of your article, it was, again, like 10 days ago, it was at 34, I think you had at high major spots, and you projected it to increase only farther. I mean, I know K-State is still talking potentially to another European, as well, maybe looking at a European big as part of that. And to your point, I mean, some of the highlights you see, like guys K-State was recruiting over there, they're like throwing lobs to David McCormick. David McCormick was on the national champions. Like they're playing with grown men. They're playing with older guys who played at the college level. And it certainly seems like an area that you could maybe capitalize. We'll see how much longer you can capitalize on it before everybody starts to do it. It's probably going to go more expensive here at some point. But Isaac, I appreciate it so much. Grateful for your time. Everybody go check out Isaac's work over at cbssports.com and 24/7 Sports. Some tremendous content over there. If you haven't read the article about K-State, go check it out. If you haven't read the Euro invasion article, it might be of note to you because K-State is hitting Europe hard as well right now. Isaac, so grateful for the time and appreciate the great work that you do and for joining the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.